We're doing a lower motor mount change on a 96 Nissan Altima with a KA24DE engine. There's two mounts in the lower cross member, starting with the front motor mount here. Followed by the rear motor mount here. The first thing you're going to want to do is jack your car up, but not actually take it off the ground. You're going to put the jack under the oil pan and just jack it till the car starts to rise up to take the weight off of the engine. Once you have your car up on the ramps and you have your engine supported under the oil pan, like this, as you can see here, there's not really much pressure on the jack. It's just enough to keep the weight of the engine off of the cross member here when we take it out. But what you can do is come down and disconnect the actual bolts that go between the mounts and the cross member, which will be this one right here. And you can undo that. It's a nut on one side, so you'll just be able to drive it through. And then come further back down here, and you'll be able to take this bolt, the one that's directly in front there, out as well. Once you have the nuts and bolts off, to look like this, the front is a nut and bolt, and the back is just a bolt. They're both 14s. They should slip out pretty easily on the way out. The way back in is where you'll have more of an issue with the new mounts. After you have them removed, the next thing you can do is come down and remove your cross member bolts. After you have your mount nuts and bolts out and removed, the next thing you can come down and do is remove your cross member bolts and nuts. You'll have two in the front and then three more located further back down the member down here. You'll have 1, 2, and 3. After removing those 5 bolts, you'll be able to remove the cross member and get to your mounts. Now that we have the cross member off, this is what it'll look like. And we can clearly see where our mounts go and which ones are broken. This one's clearly cracked right down the middle, and this one has clear cracking along the back edge here. These are mounted in by two 14mm bolts on each one. We have locations here, 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 and here. So you can undo those and take them off. After you have your bolts removed from the mounts to the blocks, you can then proceed to replace the mounts. The things to be careful of here are the actual direction that the mounts come in. The best thing to do is mark them before you take them off. Sometimes your mounts, as my old ones did, have an arrow as to the direction to place forward. All I ever do is just mark the arrows in the same direction, forward or backward, just as long as you make sure you orient them the same way. If you really look at the detail of these, there's a heavier side and a lighter side to it. So the easiest thing to do is come up top and just make an arrow on each one, so you make sure you line them up the same way when they go back in. It's the easiest thing you can do. Now the bolts that mount the mounts to the cross member can be torqued from 47 to 55 foot-pounds. After you have your motor mounts changed over and torqued down, this is how they should look. And then the next thing we'll do is mount the cross member back up to the car. The next thing you can do after having your mounts back to the cross member is put the cross member back to the frame. You can use the 2 front bolts and 3 nuts in the back. After you have your cross member mounting bolts back in, the 2 front ones should be nice and tight, and you'll feel them stop. And then you'll have your other 3 down in the back here. The next thing you can do is come up and insert your mounting bolts back through. The back one is just a bolt, one that looks like that, and you can insert that back through. You have to play with the jack a little bit as well as pushing up and down on the engine in certain spots. You can use a pry bar in certain areas to maneuver it down. It starts off fairly close, so it's not too bad, and then you can do the same thing in the front. After you have your bolts back through on each mount, you can go ahead and tighten the front one to between 47 and 55 foot-pounds, and come back to the rear and tighten that one to between 22 and 29 foot-pounds. Once you have both bolts torqued down, you can go ahead and clean up because you're done. You've successfully changed lower motor mounts on a '96 Nissan Altima.